Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Fire Safety Essentials. I'd like to welcome the community members of Wallington and the surrounds who are joining us for this morning's presentation. This presentation will last approximately 1 to 1.5 hours. There is no need to take notes. All the information that we're going to be discussing this morning will be contained in a resource pack that you can actually download at the end of the presentation. My name is Raj Samurai, and in my capacity as a community educator, I'll be taking you on this facilitated journey. As is the case with all our presentations, I would like to begin by an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are actually hosting this online meeting today, and also pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and of course, any other Aboriginal people that are joining us here this morning. Thank you. Just want to get the technology out of the way just before we do anything. This is actually the linchpin to our engagement strategy this morning. As you'll notice from the screen in front of you, there are two ways of getting my attention. As the only host on today, you can actually contact me by raising your hand. That will attract my attention that you wish to ask a question, and certainly feel free to ask any questions as we go through this presentation. Secondly, there is a chat function, and the chat function is just that. It allows you to make comment by way of typing in your request, your message, your query in the chat bar. The way to access this is by floating your mouse icon over the chat icon. This opens up a box which allows you then to type away. Feel free to type away. In fact, before we go any further, let's make use of these two functions: the raise hand on the right-hand side, and also the chat function on the left-hand side. Let's try the chat function first. For those of you who are joining this morning, perhaps it would be a great idea if you could use the chat function to tell me where you're calling me, where you're joining us from this morning. Feel free to offer those comments as we proceed along. And while you're navigating with that technology, let me let you know that this presentation is actually being recorded. It's actually been recorded for my purposes and my purposes alone. You are not recorded. The very nature of a webinar is, at this stage, the way that this is configured is that I can't actually see you, even though you can see and hear me. I'll just give you a few minutes while you offer some chat function for me and get used to that idea. So where are you actually calling us from? Wonderful. I'll now proceed to the next slide, which is a bit of housekeeping, really, more than anything else. Remember, another way that we are going to get maximum engagement in this new format that the CFA, the Country Fire Authority, are actually trialling at the moment is by use of polls. Now, every now and again, I will launch a poll. This will be available for you to answer. The responses are totally anonymous. They are optional, but why not give it a go? I don't know what you're saying, and this is all about learning. It's about you learning exactly what fire safety essentials and the basics of fire safety is all about. When you end the poll, don't forget to close out of the poll when you finish. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for the comments so far. I appreciate the input from you. Let's go on to the next slide. Let's see, what are you actually going to be learning today? I'm passionate about this space. I'm passionate about keeping our communities safe during fire time, during the fire period. Risk mitigation, the idea that we need to be out of harm's way, is our #1 concern. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about the very basics of fire, learning about what the local risks are in your area, and particularly in the Wallington area, what to expect from a fire, what are the key elements that make up fire? How do we know if there is a fire? And we're going to be spending a bit of time talking about some of those communication strategies that are out there. Where do you get your intel from? We're going to be talking about planning and decision making. And again, this is absolutely critical when it comes to solid, good outcomes in terms of safety. And as an ex-Cub Scout, I think it is essential that you try and have that level of preparation front and center all the time. And of course, we all know that the best laid plans can fail. And if this is the case, how do we have other options in place? What are the other options that we can actually use? So it's quite important that we use this session to get as much out of the intel that we're trying to, that is available here. Let's move on now to talk a bit more about, well, what are the local risks in your area? And understand those local risks. First and foremost, Fire Safety Essentials is tailored towards your locality, for the locality of Wallington and the surrounds. Wallington, as we know, is located in the municipality of Greater Geelong. It has a population of 1,364 persons, as recorded in the 2016 census. So it's a sizable community that we have out there. Wallington itself reclines in the fertile heart of the Bellarine Peninsula, surrounded by well-treed, undulating green landscape and deep, well-drained soils. And these are all important considerations as we move forward in this presentation, knowing your local risks, knowing the lay of the land. The annual Wallington Strawberry Festival celebrates the fine fruit and history of the district. Again, a consequence of that really rich, well-moistured soil. A variety of tourist parks, cottages, and attractions have opened in recent years, continuing the historical role of the town. So it's also a tourist town. One thing that is for sure, and this is something that has become evident to me in a period of time that I've been engaging with communities in this role, is the tremendous amount of community cohesion that exists. We're all looking out for each other. We all know who lives next door, who lives down the road. We are well connected. And this is the very strength that underpins the Country Fire Authority's approach to fire and fire management. That close connection with community is our strength. There's no doubt about the statement on this slide. Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Yes, we do talk about the US and we talk about California and places like that. This particular slide shows the many different landscapes that exist across our fine continent. We have grassland in abundance. We have bushland in abundance. We have mountainous forest areas and, of course, extensive farmland all around. And Wallington is no different in this makeup. Victoria is one of the most fire-prone areas in the world. We've already said that. But did you know that Victoria has had its fair share of fires? Fire itself has been part of the Australian continent for millions of years. Many fires, often sparked by lightning, have been the cause of the landscape being the way that it is today, the variety that we see today. Our Aboriginal people use fire for many thousands of years to care for country. And what did this caring for country actually mean? What did it actually do? Well, the fires were used as a tool that encouraged the growth and extent of grasslands. And this actually enhanced hunting. These fires also reduced the levels of fuel. We'll be talking a bit about fuel load very shortly. And it kept the vegetation from becoming too dense and hard to walk through. Interestingly, fire-keeping records only really started 100 years just in the early stages of European colonization in about 1851. Let's explore this a bit further. Let's explore a more up-to-date snapshot of where we're at when we talk about weather trends and weather patterns across our part of the state. What you're viewing in front of you now is what we call a map showing the different weather districts. The take-home message here is that each fire district will have its own level of fire risk. The fire risk in East Gippsland will be very different to the Southwest, which will be very different to the Mallee. Let's just peel the layers back a bit more and talk about seasonal outlook. The seasonal outlook is another very important consideration. Now, don't be too bamboozled by these two maps of Australia. The map on the left demonstrates temperature, whereas the map on the right gives you a demonstration of the rainfall. What we're currently experiencing is what we call the La Nina effect. Some of you may be familiar with the La Nina effect. But what is La Nina? Well, first and foremost, there's some good news about La Nina, particularly from a fire perspective. La Ninas are expected to reduce the risk of prolonged fire activity across most of Australia, or most of Victoria, I stand corrected, most of Victoria, compared to last year. So reduced risk of prolonged fire activity. So why is this? Well, quite simply, the reason for this is that La Nina produces increased rainfall. So greater rainfall. And I'm sure that in Wallington and many parts of the state has actually seen above average rainfall. And this is a consequence of the La Nina effect. Coupled with this increased rainfall, as typified by the map on the right-hand side, showing the median rainfall for September to November 2020, we get cooler daytime temperatures, generally south of the tropics, and warmer overnight temperatures north of the tropics. So we've got this duality of weather with rain and temperature. Higher than normal rain, lower than normal daytime temperatures with occasional spikes. And some of us have experienced those spikes in recent months with the high 30-degree plus days. Before I go on to discuss that a bit further, let me just say that the last La Nina event appeared during the winter of 2017-2018, and this was followed by its counterpart or cousin, El Nina, in the year 2018-19. So there is this duality of weather patterns. These two weather trends work together. When it's an El Nina, we have a certain weather pattern that is opposite to the El Nina. What this actually means is that when we do have that increased rainfall, we'll have an above average amount of soil moisture. Let's just drill this down a bit further. Let's look at what this means for Wallington in a local seasonal outlook. Wallington is in a part of Victoria that has experienced slightly above average rainfall and consequently above average soil moisture. This has actually made the growth of fuel, and grasses primarily, prolific grass use. What does that actually mean? It means that in the event of a fire or a bad fire day, there is a copious or a surplus amount of roadside fuel available for ignition. And if we couple that with the rapid drying or curing, as we like to say, the rapid curing or drying of this excessive fuel load, we have a recipe for fast-moving grass fires in our locality. And Wallington is a typical example. With a VFRR rating, a Victorian fire risk rating of 2, very high, there is the high risk of rapid moving grass fires in your locality. And of course, like every season, there's a need for us to be prepared for a fire that could happen as a consequence of this high fuel load. Now, as I progress through this presentation, please feel free to make comment, raise hand. What I might do at this stage, because it might be a good idea to get a better feel of who's out there in the audience, I'm actually going to launch our first poll. And this first poll, as you see appearing on your screen, just gives me an idea of the audience that I'm actually talking to today, so that I can actually tailor the content to fit the audience. These questions are very generic, asking you where you live, how long, sorry, not where you live, how long you've lived in the area of Wallington and the surrounds. Have you actually been to CFA meeting before? What was your means of communication? How did you find out about this particular online presentation? And finally, how do you rate your fire knowledge? Where do you sit on that spectrum of sort of not knowing a great deal to being an expert? Let me have that feedback by way of the poll. Remember how the poll works? Just scan your answer, click the answer that you think is correct, and then submit your responses. I might just give you another 5 seconds or so. That's wonderful. I can see you answering those. That's wonderful. I'm now going to end the polling. Wonderful. And share those results with you. Okay. Now, that's quite an interesting response to the first one. A lot of people have been in the area of Wallington from 1 year up to 10 years plus. It's quite a cross section. A lot of new people in the area, as well as a lot of long established folks as well. That's good. That's actually really good. And we can all take learnings from this. Majority have not been to a CFA meeting before. That's interesting too. Yeah. Oh, this is good. Social media has been the key way that you're actually able to find out about today's meeting. And that's an important point as we move further down the track. Some of you did see it in the, you were recommended by a friend or, yep, okay. And rating your knowledge around fire. Okay, yeah, another good cross section there from very low to medium. Fantastic. All right. Well, based on that feedback that I've just received from you as my listening audience today, I know now that this Fire Safety Essentials will actually give you a very good entry-level information about fire behaviour. And that's the core of this morning's presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing those results. Don't forget to close out of the box. Wonderful. Let's move on to the local vegetation. And I'm going to open the chat function here again. We've spoken about the wonderful area that is Wallington and the many activities and facilities that exist in this locality. Well, let's talk more a bit about the vegetation. Let's get personal with the vegetation. What is the local landscape? How does it look? And I'll open the chat function and let me know, what is it that you think makes your area, the landscape of your area? Is it grassland? Is it scrub? Is it bush? You know, what is the vegetation? What does it actually look like? And we'll go on to discuss, well, exactly why does this matter? So in the chat function, once again, I'll just monitor the chat as we're going along here. Wonderful. Yep. And thank you for your responses. Yep. I mean, look, when we talk about the local vegetation, it would be fair to say that the predominant vegetation around the Wallington area is grass with areas of brush and bush along the roadsides. And I'm sure you'll all agree. And that kind of reaffirms some of the responses that you've just given me there. So as we've said previously, with the La Nina effect, that excessive rain, daytime drying, high soil moisture, the resultant prolific fuel growth, there is clearly the potential for fast-moving grass fires. There is no doubt about that. But there's also that coupled with the possibility of Ember Attack. We were talking about Ember Attack very shortly. Ember Attack from nearby bush to the north, northwest, and also the east, northeast. So can you see how this particular presentation is very relevant to the communities in and around the Wallington area because of the potential for grass fires? And that's why you have that Victorian Fire Risk Register rating of 2, indicative of very high. What does this all mean? Well, we need to understand fire behaviour a bit more to get a real feel of what fast-moving grass fires are all about. The number one force that drives a grass fire is the wind. The wind is the driving force. The wind will dictate both the speed and the direction of that fire. A change of wind will cause a change of fire direction. We often describe the fire front as the very head or the front of the fire. The fire front will change direction should there be a change of wind direction. With the topography of the Wallington area, and I know that there's a fair amount of undulations and hills in that locality, let's not become complacent thinking that, okay, between us and the advancing fire, there are a number of hills. Because of the hills, it may take some time for the fire to get to me. This in actual fact is not a good presumption, because fires travel much faster uphill than they do downhill. For every 10-degree rise in inclination, the speed of the fire will double. So that fire that's a number of hills away from you will actually get to you a lot quicker than you may have well imagined. That wind will cause the fire to rapidly race up hills, and the reason for that is, without getting too technical, is the radiant heat and also the convective heat. Now, there's a couple of terms that I've used already that I will be offering further explanation for. The first is radiant heat, and the second is ember attack. Embers that fly ahead of the fire front will often cause spot fires ahead of the fire front. Some elements of foliage, particularly the large gum and cypress plantations and woodlands, are excellent ember traps. This will cause resultant canopy fires, which will progress the fire. So let's not be too complacent when it comes to a grass fire that may be some distance away from you. I'm now going to move on to talk about local risks, the local risks in the Wallington area. And in order to address this, I'd like some feedback from yourselves, and I'm going to launch another poll. This poll is all about those local risks and understanding them. It's a multiple choice poll. I'm going to launch it now. And what I'd like for you to do is jump on and give me your responses. What do you think are the local risks in your area? What make it a high risk area? And I might just give you a couple of minutes to address those particular questions. And as we go through this presentation, we're really forming a storyboard where we're peeling back the key components of fire. We want to be able to demonstrate the very harsh and indiscriminate nature of this force of nature, fire. And we want to bring home the story that fire is dangerous and we don't need to be there. We need to be out of harm's way. We need to mitigate the risk at all times. Okay, I'm going to end that poll now and share the results with you. Yep. It's really just as we really expected, and you've all been you've been 100% in your responses, okay? Yes, windy roads, or windy narrow roads, as there are many around the Wallington area, are a major impact when it comes to fire and fire risk. Those trees that are trees with the limbs that hang over, as I spoke about earlier, the canopy fires and ember traps, those limbs will eventually come down and cause a block across the road, a blockage to both entry and exit. Wallington is a high tourist area, we know. We've just mentioned the various facilities, the strawberry farm, for example. We've spoken at length about the speed of grass fires and how this is a local risk because of the high fuel load, particularly roadside and particularly along some of our grass verges. The threat of fires being sparked by embers, that's another high record response that I've had there, and naturally the high fuel load. All these have the potential to cause local risk. And in the event of fire safety and risk mitigation, we need to be aware that these are local risks. Not all areas have the same risks. Not all areas are high tourist locations. Not all areas have narrow, windy roads, but Wallington does. I'm going to stop sharing those results now, and thank you for those that offered their feedback there. I'm now going to move on to the resources at hand. What is it that our local CFA brigade have in the event of a fire incident? The Wallington Brigade, a tremendous group of volunteer firefighters that work tremendously hard to protect their community on bad fire days. In order to do this, they have at their disposal 2 trailers, 1 trailer pump, and a forward control vehicle. What I'd like to do now is just set the stage for a rhetorical question. And that rhetorical question really looks at how confident would you be and how realistic is it for you to expect 2 trailers, 1 trailer pump and an FCV, a CFA crew to be on your drive, at your farm, at your business, at your home on a bad fire day. Bearing in mind that they have the task of having to look after a population of almost 1,400 people across almost 470 homes and dwellings. How realistic is that? We have to acknowledge and understand the capacity of our local brigades to take care of each and every one of us on a bad fire day. So I'll just let that sit there for a while and just review how far we've got through. What are the key points that we've considered up until now in this presentation? I've tried to give you a basic understanding of fire behaviour, that unpredictable force of Mother Nature, indiscriminate. Not a nice place to be in. I've made some kind of reinforcement around the various risks that are out there and the need to have a plan. Plan ahead. Practice your plan, leave early. And finally, I've tried to mention something around the desire to have awareness, be empowered, take ownership of the situation. You cannot expect the brigade to be on your drive on a bad fire day. Have your own fire plan. Enact it early. Make sure all and everyone is on the same page such that you get a good outcome. You are out of harm's way well before the fire arrives. What I'm going to do now is move on to the next slide, which is all about what to expect from a fire. And when we talk about this, we're essentially talking about Ember Attack. Now, what I'm about to show you is a very dramatic animation of Ember Attack. It's very real, and we make no apologies for the dramatic nature of this presentation. It is designed to shock, but it's also designed to drive home that message that embers are dangerous, and embers are by far the biggest cause of property loss. So without further ado, if it's such that you feel that this in some way may impact you emotionally, please look away and then join us at the end of this presentation, and I'll let you know when that is. So, I present to you Ember Attack.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs and pieces of bark. They help the bushfires spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers, like large pieces of burning ribbon bark, hundreds of metres into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometres beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realise the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
Having viewed that presentation a number of times, it gets me every time, the very harsh and real nature of fire, and that almost that precursor to fire, the ember attack ahead of the fire front, the spotting that's caused, those spot fires, and the need to have your property adequately fire ready or fire prepared, having the spouting clear of any debris or fuel, having fuel loads away from the house. And all of these considerations are provided by the Property Advice Visit Service, the PAV service. This is a community door knocking service that offers advice to community and household members around the importance of keeping your property fire ready or prepared as best as possible to minimize risk. And I keep coming back to that risk mitigation all the time. By preparing your property, you are mitigating risk, you are buying time. It could potentially save your property, It could save adjoining properties and keep you safe. And again, this resource is available by way of the download information at the end of the presentation. For those that looked away earlier, please feel free to join us as we continue to talk about embers and Ember Attack. Whilst embers are one way that your property could potentially catch fire or ignite, there are other ways, and one of the ways is what we call direct flame impact. What do I mean by direct flame impact? Just that. Flames reaching your front door by direct access. And what we mean there is fast-moving grass fires that are unimpeded will reach your home very quickly. And we often say that if there's continuity of fuel, the fire will get to your door. If there is fuel to your doorstep, you will have fire to your doorstep. Mitigate that risk by having a divide, breaking that continuity of fuel, perhaps having a driveway made of gravel or some other non-combustible material. Having an area of green around your home, short, well-maintained grass. This will again break that continuity of fuel. As mentioned previously, there's a huge amount of property loss during an ember attack, and some of these graphic images of fast-moving grass fires pre, during, and post give you some idea of the devastation that can be caused by fast-moving grass fires. Being caught in a situation like this can be very dark and disorientating. It can be extremely noisy. And of course, visibility will be very poor as well. Do you want to subject yourself to this kind of personal inconvenience? Let alone the amount of stress this must put you under. Now, again, I make no apologies for the next animation. And again, feel free to look away should you find elements of this animation, again, distressing. It's necessary for us to show you these animations, for you to get underneath the skin of fire, to understand the very indiscriminate, harsh, and real danger that is fire. I'm going to share this animation with you now. And the way I'm going to do that is just by locating it, first of all, in my folder. And I'm now going to play it. And as I say, once again, look away if you feel that this is going to impact you in any way. Radiant heat.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved, natural fibre clothing, like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defence against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
I'm going to continue to say that during this presentation. Leaving early is always going to be your safest option. This particular radiant heat animation is graphic and very real. As human beings, we are not designed to withstand the intensity of this kind of heat. And when we talk about fatalities in fires, people often die from the effects of the radiant heat way before the fire even arrives. It's almost like the Ember Attack and the radiant heat are the precursors to the fire, the warning signs that danger is fast approaching. When we talk about risk mitigation and being out of harm's way, why subject yourself to this level of personal duress, inconvenience, when you can leave early, when you can implement your plan? One thing that does happen, particularly following fire events, the CFA will do lots of empathetic interviewing or chatting to persons in communities that have been impacted by fire. The next slide that I'm going to show you gives you some ideas, some of the spoken word, some of the statements that people make. And I believe that these statements are actually extremely powerful to give you some idea of that level of emotional intelligence that's related to being caught in a fire situation. Often words speak volumes. What I'd like to do now is share another animation with you. This particular one is not made up. These people are not acting. These are genuine accounts from persons that were caught in a fire, and it's their real life account, word for word, as they experienced it. So while we're in this sort of emotional space and trying to capture the heightened emotions around fire, I think this is particularly relevant. Again, if you feel that any of the comments might be sensitive or in any way emotionally disturbing, please look away. I'll never do that again.
Ten years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
In future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
Before the fire even got here. There were a couple of other comments there that stuck in my mind. Trauma to the children. If I had known then what I know now, never again. So we've got all this body of evidence, people telling us that it's such a horrible thing and we'd never do it again. What more do we need to convince ourselves that we need to have a plan that encourages us to leave early, take care of individuals, family members, pets, belongings, and leave early. Because if you have a plan, you can plan for all of those outcomes. Up until now, this presentation has talked about the very stressful and traumatic nature of fire, the necessity to have a plan and to be prepared for something that you know a bit more about, and understanding that if you do leave late, there may be roads that get blocked both for entry and access. You've got a better understanding now of embers and how they can be extremely damaging when it comes to property loss and the need to have a property that reduces ember risk. We've spoken a bit about the radiant heat and its indiscriminate, almost toxic nature as it blisters and causes, cognitive malfunction, the ability to think and think straight. Radiant heat is by far the biggest killer. There's no two ways about that. In a fire situation, your ability to make good decisions will be impacted by many factors. I'm going to launch a poll now to just engage your feedback in that regard. So again, this is a multiple choice question. I'm going to launch it now. What are the factors, in your opinion, that will affect your ability to make good decisions? And don't, as I mentioned earlier, when you're caught in a fire situation, and particularly when you have no knowledge of fire or a limited knowledge of fire, this can be extremely a stressful place. Yep, I'll give you a couple more seconds and then I'll end the poll. Right, I'll end the poll there. Thank you for your responses. I'll share the results with you. That's wonderful. Okay, well, as I expected, there's a high proportion of you that have ticked every single element there. Stress is by far the most important consideration. As human beings, generally speaking, we don't handle stress well. Some of us have a better stress load capacity than others, but the majority of us, particularly if we're dealing with something that's alien or foreign to us, if our knowledge of fire is limited, we're not in control. If we're not in control, our stress burden will go up. If it's such that the situation is changing so rapidly around you, this can further compound stress because, again, you're not in control. When things are not going to a plan that you made, again, your stress burden will increase. If you throw into the mix this element of time, and time is our biggest point of tension in life is time. Getting from A to B in time, making that doctor's appointment, the GP interview, the meeting with the accountant, all these are time-driven events. Extremely stressful. If you couple that with the fact that this could be a life and death situation, time again is absolutely critical. And ultimately, communication breakdown, the last response, you all tick that as a major factor that would impact on your decision. And of course it would, because you'd be thinking to yourself, where are the children? Is young Frank still at footy practice? Did someone pick up Sarah from netball? Is my husband doing that overnight stay in Geelong? He's been away for a couple of days. Is he on his way back? This lack of preparation, lack of communication and forward planning is going to heighten your stress burden. And we know what that means. It means that we'll become irrational in our thinking process. Do we really want to be in that space? I think not. I'm going to close out of that poll. Thank you for sharing the information with me. And if you can close out of your poll, we're going to move on to how do we know if there is a fire? And we spoke about this earlier on, the communication channel. For example, at the chat at the beginning, many of you actually use social media to know about today's presentation. Social media features very strongly. Before we go into that space, I'd like to spend a bit of time just discussing the fire danger rating, or the FDR, as you can see on your screen at the moment. Many of you will be familiar with this, often seen on social media. Some of us see it, it can actually be seen on television as well. Every now and again, you might see it on TV. And of course, as a sign on the side of the road, generally but not always near a fire station or a fire shed. What does it mean? There's a tremendous amount of confusion that exists around this, and I'm going to dispel that myth straight away by launching a poll, which is going to appear on your screen now. And this poll actually looks at your understanding of what the fire danger rating actually means. So here you go. I'm launching the poll now. The poll is now in progress, so it's on your screen. Have a read of the questions. There's 3 questions in total. The first one is asking, well, what does the FDR mean? Is it response 1 or response 2? Is it an indicator of how likely a fire would start? Or is it an indicator of how bad a fire would be if it were to start? Okay, have a think about that one. And again, in the polling process, your responses are anonymous. I don't know who's answering what. This is a learning platform. Feel free to have a go, and we'll all take learnings from this. How many of you actually know how many code red days have happened in the last 5 years? And the last question, what about the number of severe or extreme days that we've had in the last 5 years? Yep, thank you for answering those responses. I'll just give that a couple more seconds before we move on to the next section. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to end the polling there. Lovely. And share the results. Lovely. Interesting. Okay. So as you can see, a lot of you thought that the FDR was an indicator of how likely it is that fire will start. This, in fact, is the incorrect answer. The correct answer is response 2, which is that the FDR is indicator of how bad a fire would be if one were to start. So there you go. So we've learned something there. Also, there have actually been no code red days in the Southwest in the last 5 years. So a couple of you got that right, actually, which is fantastic. And many of you got the last response right. There's actually been 6 severe or extreme days in the last 5 years in our region. I'm going to take that to the next level now, because we've spoken about code red and we've spoken about severe and extreme. What does this really mean? I'm going to close out to that now, stop sharing the results and close out to that. And if you could do likewise, that'll be fantastic. So, severe. You remember that back from the FDR as we progress from the left to right? The severe. A severe day is indicative of a hot, dry, and possibly windy conditions. Now, if a fire started on a severe day and it took hold, it would probably be uncontrollable. Okay? Now, let's just keep that in our minds as we move on to the next element of the FDR, which is the extreme sector. What does extreme mean? By its very nature, expect extremely hot, dry, and windy conditions. And if a fire started on an extreme day and it took hold, it would most definitely be uncontrollable. It would also be unpredictable, as fires are, and uncontrollable, and also very fast moving. What we would find is that we would get spotting or spot fires ahead of the fire front, and that these would move quickly in many and come from many different directions. So can you see how we move from severe to extreme, that the degree of risk increases? Okay, moving on to code red. What do we mean by code red? Again, by its very nature, it's the last sector of the fire danger rating. And at this point, we can clearly say that these are the worst possible conditions for both bush or grass fires. Our Australian homes are just not designed to take these code red fire conditions. Your safest place on code red days is to be away from areas of bush. And there are no ifs or buts about that. We strongly suggest that you leave early, preferably on the day before or the morning of as a last option, but to be away from those fire-prone and fire danger areas. What we suggest is that you use the FDR as a tool, as a trigger to encourage you to leave at a particular time. It could be that you decide that on a very high day, that's going to be your trigger. That's the day that that's a time that you're going to implement your fire plan and leave. So some of you might decide that the severe will be your trigger. As the CFA, we advocate early departure, early exit away from danger, away from the advancing fire. Fires can change direction. They may not impact you, but why risk it? You can always come back if the fire proceeds in a different direction as a result of wind change, which often happens in our part of the world, but that should not be a guarantee. Leave early, protect yourselves, your family, your possessions, and look out for each other. When we talk about communication, and this is a big part of modern day 21st century world that we live in, we have what we call the old school or the traditional means of communication: the radio, the television, the conversation with Flo, the conversation with Janice and John when you're having coffee, the conversation as you're walking your dog or going for a jog around the park, local gossip, local intel. Couple that with the modern day take on communication and the various digital formats that we've got out there. Many of them are shown by the very commonly recognized icons these days of Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. All of these provide information. We live in what I call an infobesity world, where we are bombarded left, right, and center with information, be it traditional or digital, 24/7. All of the ones that I've referred to here are what we call informal sources of communication. They're not necessarily credible, legitimate, evidence-based, or real-time. From a CFA perspective, we would strongly suggest that you look to one of these platforms. Yes, they are digital, but these will provide a more credible, legitimate, evidence-based, and real-time information base that you can use to stay informed and to use these tools to assist your decision-making process. Assist you with information that will give you real-time, local information, local intel about fire activity. By far, one of the best apps that we can recommend strongly to you is the Vic Emergency app. Have this downloaded on your smartphone if you don't already have it. The Vic Emergency app gives you that real-time information. It allows you to plan your travel or your journey around fire activity in your area. At this point, I'm also going to mention local news, the importance of connection to local news. We've already spoken that fires can be a very disorientating and dark, noisy space, granted. We've already mentioned that in the event of fire, communications will go down. And when they go down, the only means of communication for you will be a battery-operated radio. Make this a critical component in your emergency kit. And a few more words about that later. Your emergency kit should contain a battery-operated radio. This battery-operated radio will allow you to connect with the outside world. ABC Radio 774 is the frequency that will provide emergency advice. There are a number of other platforms mentioned there, which will also offer you credible, legitimate, real-time, evidence-based information about fire behaviour and emergency precautions. We're going to peel the layers back a bit more and talk about the Vic Emergency app and the warning triage or warning system that has been in place for a number of years. By its very nature, the first element of this triage is advice. Advice, sorry, can't get my words out. Advice, by its very nature, is just that. When we talk about advice, it's saying that an incident is occurring. Be mindful of it, know that it's occurring. Access information and monitor conditions. An advice warning can also be used as a notification that the activity in the area has subsided and that it's no longer a danger to you. That's the first element in the event of a fire. You will receive this yellow triangle by way of your Vic Emergency app or on your computer. The second stage is watch and act. And watch and act by its very nature is watch, observe your environment, observe the conditions, use your vision, use your senses, and act accordingly. Act because you may need to take action to protect yourself and others. And an emergency is developing nearby. The next stage of this triage is the emergency warning in red, by its very nature, an emergency. As a community member, you are in imminent danger and there is a need to take action immediately because you will be impacted. Very clear triage, advice, watch and act, and an emergency warning. Do not wait for a warning, and I'll explain the significance of that very shortly. Do not wait for these warnings. Do not wait for the advice. Do not wait for the watch and act. Do not wait for the emergency warning. Two further components that I just want to shed a bit of light on at this moment in time is, look, evacuation. You may be asked to evacuate at a moment in time, and procedures will be in place for you to do that. Community information. Community information really is to let you know that an incident has occurred and there's no further threat to the community. That's one option for community information, or a newsletter containing updates to the community affected by the emergency. It's all part of that information system that is provided to affected communities. Why not to wait for a warning? What I'm about to show you is a depiction, a timeline of a fire that starts and its progression over a 30-minute period to give you some idea that at some stages, at some point, in some instances, you might be ahead of the warnings. So don't wait for the warnings. The moment you get a sense that things aren't right, activate your fire plan and move. So, it's a hot day, it's a windy day. And we know a bit more about what hot and windy could potentially mean. It could be a severe day. The wind's picking up, it's getting rather hot. A small fire starts some 18, 19 minutes from your home. You're sitting at home, it is that hot, windy day, and you've decided, okay, I'll put the air conditioning on and I'll close the blinds because that'll help the house keep the house a bit more cooler. So you at this stage have no knowledge of this fire. You've been monitoring your Vic emergency app, there's nothing happening there, so everything's all good. However, a fire starts. About 5 to 6 minutes afterwards, the fire is reported to the emergency services. At this point, the local CFA will be notified. They will make way to the fire station for turnout. It might take them a couple of minutes to get themselves organised and be on the road, by which time the fire has continued to progress. At the 10-minute stage on this timeline, the fire has grown both in intensity and size. This fire continues to progress at a rather rapid rate, pushed along by a wind, because we've already said it's windy conditions, and a high fuel load. A potentially fast-moving grass fire, perhaps. Although not shown on this timeline, there may be undulations along the way as well. And remember, fires will travel faster uphill. At this point, maybe 12 minutes into the fire, since the fire first started, an advice message is received. Remember, advice? Just be mindful that there is fire activity in the area. At 20 minutes, the fire has impacted your home, is now much bigger, progressing further along towards its next destination. It's at this point that you actually receive an updated emergency warning. Too late for the residents that live in the home. As time progresses, and again, the fire continues to grow in intensity and in size, and in 30 minutes' time is much bigger than it was previously. This animation gives you an indication of how important it is to not be mindful of the warning system. Take and use your initiative to leave and leave early, because you might be ahead of the warnings. It's crucially important that you use your senses. Community folk in and around the Wallington area have a great sense of connection both to community and land. And it's this intrinsic quality that's actually very strong when it comes to using your senses. We often know when the sky is a slightly different color, when things aren't quite right. We can often use our sight to look over the horizon and see what's on the horizon. Is there anything that's out of the ordinary? Not the normal horizon that we see. Can we see ash in the air or debris of any kind? Embers, perhaps. Is it warmer than it normally is? Is radiant heat traveling ahead of the fire front? Can we feel that on our skins? Is there heightened activity in the area? Is something happening that we should be aware of? Can we hear fire? Can we hear limbs coming down, or the crackle of sounds, crackling sounds of wood in a forested area nearby, perhaps? And of course, the sense of smell. Is there anything that smells unusual or out of the ordinary? There is that need to be vigilant at all times, particularly during the fire season. Because as we've said, fires can start at any time and go in any direction. We've identified some of the local risks in our area. Let's keep those in mind. Up until now, we've also spoken about the FDR, the fire danger rating, and how to use it. Use it as a trigger. It's going to be a high day, a very high day, so I'm going to be leaving, and I'll leave early, or leave early in the morning, or I'll leave the day before. I'll make sure that I've got my emergency bag. I'll make sure that my fire plan includes all the vulnerable members within my community and my family. I know to use credible sources of information and not the informal sources of information. I've got that big emergency app now, so I'm going to be better informed. And again, I'm going to use that alongside my FDR to be able to make an informed decision and be out of harm's way. I know about the importance of not waiting for a warning, not relying on the warning system, because I may well be ahead of the warnings. We've spoken about a lot of elements up until now, and we've tried to really peel back the layers of fire safety essentials, the very basics that need to be in your armory to stay safe. But planning and decision-making pulls all this together. We're going to go through a hypothetical situation now to give you some idea of some of the components and how they all come together to keep you safe away from fire. We call this a hypothetical situation, but it's as close to the real situation as we could possibly make it to really evoke those feelings of pressure, of pre-preparation. So without further ado, let's make a start on this particular hypothetical. We call this hypothetical number 1, okay? It's 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. When you look outside, you can see that it's already hot and windy. The morning news is reporting that for today, it's going to be a day of extreme fire danger rating. So you know from your FDR, you know what extreme means. However, you've got heaps to do. You know, you've got to get into Geelong and you've got to have that appointment with a specialist. So you jump into your car and you start driving. And as you're heading towards Geelong, you suddenly see, well, there's a few small branches falling around you. And you also can feel the radiant heat coming through the windows on your car. But hey, you've got this appointment and you've got to go. You get into Geelong and you do what you're doing. You've had your appointment and you thought, I'll just stop for a coffee before I go home. Anyway, it's about lunchtime and you overhear people talking about a fire that started near Wallington. Alarm bells go off and you jump onto your Vic Emergency app, as you would all do. And you find out, well, exactly where? Near Wallington. Is it near my home? When you notice that it's actually started a short distance from your home, you then decide, well, it is a short distance from my home. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in the car and head back. And as you're heading back, it's still quite hot, but you're keen to make sure that everything's okay at home. Periodically, you check the Vic Emergency app and still it's saying that it's okay. You know, it's a short distance from your home, but it's not bad. But the one thing that does happen, that does raise your alarm, is as you get closer to your home, you notice that the police have actually blocked the road and they're advising you not to go into the area. A tree has come down, there's a few limbs, and the fire is still quite active. You can't return home at this stage. In fact, it might be a couple of days before they reopen the road. So here you are, you've darted away from home early in the morning, you've come back because a fire has started, and now you're trapped away from your home. My question to you at this stage is, well, what does this mean for you? What's your level of preparation at this stage? I'll launch a poll here just to gauge a sense of what you think your process would be in this regard. I mean, what's your level of preparation? I mean, where would you normally be on an average Wednesday in summer? Would you be at home? Would you be at work, or would you be on holiday or on vacation? Thinking about last summer, let's just cast our minds, this sort of pre-COVID, if you like. Would you have been prepared to spend a few nights away from home in an emergency situation like this? What would your level of preparation, it's that dreaded P word again, preparation, preparation, preparation. And the final part of this particular poll is, well, would you have had an emergency bag ready? Would you have had it with you? Would you have taken it with you in the morning? Okay, I'm going to end that poll now. Thank you for all the responses. I can see that you've all answered that really well. I'll share the results. Yep. So there's a 50-50 split because a lot of folks in Wallington are actually on holiday, on vacation at that time, so they're away from the homes. Look at you guys. A few people at home and a few people at work. So there's the majority on holiday and an equal split between home and work. Interestingly, the majority of people would not have been prepared to spend time away from their home. Interesting. In fact, it's a 60-40 split. So yeah, majority would not be able to. And most surprisingly, and this is all learning for us all, so majority of people would not have had an emergency pack ready with clothes and those important documents, etc. So some key learnings there. Preparation is the key. Let's move on now, and I'll just close out of that, stop sharing the results. Close out of that. Right. So we've got that scenario. I'm going to do an extension of the very same scenario now, okay? But this time, when you look at your Vic Emergency app, you notice the fire is still a while away from your property, okay? And because it is a while away from your property, you decide, okay, I'm going to duck home again. And when you do check your phone, you notice the little yellow triangle with that warning, if you like, or the advice warning, is still some distance away. You think to yourself that you've got enough time to get home and grab some of that important stuff, okay? You've still got time. So you drive home, you're getting anxious because it's still hot, it's still windy, the radiant heat is getting a bit stronger in the car, and there's more sort of debris in the air, and it's getting a bit sort of dark as well. But as you get out onto your driveway, you notice, well, there's more, you can smell smoke. It's still very hot and getting hotter. As you would do, you would check the app again, and you see that the little yellow triangle on your screen is still an advice message. You reckon you've still got time. So what you do is you rush into the house and you start going through this checklist in your mind. Dog check, dog food check, passports, important documents, insurance documents, medications. The doctors just started you on some new blood pressure tablets. You've got to grab those. Oh, and you're asthmatic. Where's your inhaler? Oh, it's finished. What am I going to do? Grab some water, throw that in there. Grab some clothes that you might need. All those important documents. And every now and again, as you go out to the car to dump this stuff into the boot, you check the Vic Emergency app and there's still nothing. So you then run back into the house to look for some more. You're running through this list in your mind, and it's getting quite frantic and quite fraught. You can't put your hand on things straight away and you have to hunt high and low. And when you're going to look for something, you remember something else. And again, the heat's coming through the windows now. It's quite interesting. The next time that you go to the car to pull all those things, you notice that small patches of smoke rising from the garden bed, and that pile of leaves that you're intending to rake up from last weekend's tidy up. The embers have started falling near your home, and small fires are starting in those ember patches. As is normal in situations like this, you have this heightened elevation of adrenaline. You're pumped. In fact, you can feel the force of blood pumping around your body. You're out of time. What are your options? My question to you by way of the chat function is, what is the one thing that you could have done differently to not have been in this situation? Take your time, answer the poll through the chat function as you've done previously, and some great responses coming in. Yeah. If you knew that it was going to be an extreme day, if you knew that the risk of fire was high, leave early. Leave the day before as soon as you knew that that was going to be the outlook for the next day. You could have cancelled your appointment. They would have understood. Another suggestion coming up is to have your emergency bag ready so that when you duck home, you just quickly grab it and you're gone. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because some of the other considerations in a situation like this is, well, there you are, you're on your drive, you've got this ember attack happening around you. Do you grab that hose pipe and start trying to put the fires out, those small sort of ember fires in the spouting or down on the ground? Is that one option for you? If you are going to leave and you jump in the car and you head down the road, is the road going to be accessible? If it is accessible, which way are you going to turn, left or right? Which is going to be the better option for you, and how do you know what that better option is? Who's looking after Frances, your next door neighbour, who's actually on her own? She's immobile, she lies on a wheelchair, and she's got 3 dogs. Who's looking after those vulnerable members in your community, and who has consideration for their survival or their fire plan? Do they fit into your fire plan? Have you made consideration for them yourself because they're a neighbour? And remember how we spoke about that collective, cohesive nature of our communities as well. Who's looking after the horses? Who's looking after the animals? Where are the children? Are they at school? Is young Jono still playing footy today? Or has Catherine gone on that school trip? Where's my husband who was planning to visit? He was going on the tractor to the farm this afternoon. Where is he now? It may seem that I'm bombarding lots of different elements of concern to you, but these are the considerations that have to be put front and center for you to have a good, safe outcome when you're caught in a fire situation like this. And bizarrely, this is just a hypothetical. This is just a pretend scenario that we've put together to give you some sense of the gravity that is attached to fire and fire safety. Had this been a real situation, your ability to think clearly and think your way through would be even more hard because it would be so very real. And as we've mentioned, we don't handle stress very well. So let's get to know this beast that is fire and be prepared. Know what we're dealing with, be ahead of the fire game. Have your plan, activate the plan, and leave early. Of course, the Vic Emergency app and the FDR play a big part in your preparation. We are also prepared to offer bushfire planning workshop, and again, the link for that will be given in the resource pack at the end, and I'm happy to talk about it at the end of the presentation as well. We have to make mention to the pandemic status that we're in at the moment with COVID-19. From a CFA perspective, you may leave a high-risk fire area on a day of high fire danger. If it's such that you are in a self-isolation mode, please continue that at your next place of stay, but make sure that those around you are aware of your self-isolation and continue to maintain your COVID plan. You may also travel for the purposes of preparing your property for the fire season. The COVID pandemic situation is a changing dynamic. So please refer to the Department of Health and Human Services website for up-to-date information. I'm now going to spend a bit of time talking about survival options if your plan fails. And let's accept it that, okay, plans will fail. And we always need to have a number of options available to us. We spend a lot of time talking about the dangers of radiant heat already. It's imperative that you cover up as much of your exposed skin as you possibly can, as early as possible. It's crucial that if you are caught in a fire situation and you have to seek shelter, that you have elements of clothing that will protect you from that radiant heat, as demonstrated by this slide. It's also crucial that you have in your emergency bag all of these elements of clothing. Should you not have time in the first instance to change into these clothes, you have them available to protect you from radiant heat. We know that radiant heat is extremely damaging. We know radiant heat will not travel around corners, therefore seeking protection behind solid or inside solid objects is one possible means of protection. Radiant heat will travel through glass, to make sure that you're not standing anywhere near glass because it may explode or shatter. When we talk about seeking refuge, there are a number of areas where we can seek refuge in the event of being caught, or protection from advancing fire front, ember attack, and of course radiant heat. Seeking refuge in a river, in a dam, or a swimming pool will afford a level of protection from these elements. When we talk about vehicles generally are designed to get you from A to B. They are not designed to be places of refuge from advancing fires. However, we do recognize that vehicles in the event of emergency may afford some level of protection. First and foremost, make sure that the vehicle is not on a road or a access or exit route. Such a dilemma might cause a collision or impede the actions of emergency vehicles, and this has happened a number of times in the past. Make sure that the vehicle is parked on burnt ground or dark ground, or else an area of ground that has no fuel near or under it. Make sure that you position the vehicle facing the fire front, because the engine block will give you a slightly increased protection factor against the advancing radiant heat. Leave your lights on, all doors, windows closed, and lower yourself below the level of the windows and cover yourself with a dry woolen blanket. Not a wet blanket, because this will actually cause you to scald or burn as the temperature within the vehicle goes up. Make sure you have a water bottle handy and consume as much water as possible to maintain your hydration. Have a viewing point, be able to look out at the fire as it approaches, as it passes, and emerge to find another safe spot thereafter. From a CFA and safety perspective, I can't imagine a more uncomfortable place to be. But of course, we know that this is a last resort option. These are survival options should you be caught in a fire situation. We all know that following this presentation, you'll have a greater need and a greater desire to create a fire plan and be out of harm's way well in advance of the arrival of the fire. I'm going to spend a few seconds on the next slide talking about an important factor when it comes to fire safety, And that is what we call our bushfire neighbourhood safer places, or a place of last resort. And as denoted by the name, this clearly is a place of last resort. These places are identified and critically researched to give you protection from radiant heat. As a last resort, they are not, don't expect 5-star accommodation, someone to bring you your slippers and a cup of cocoa. It doesn't work like that. I know that many of you will have already left and left early. This will be a very last resort because you will have instigated your fire plan, looked at the triggers that you were going to use to leave, and took advice from your local information that you had, your fire danger rating, and also your Vic Emergency app, to make exit from the fire endangered area. It's not a comfortable place, but it is a place of last resort. The nearest place of last resort to the Wallington locality is actually Portsea. Portsea WE Newton Reserve, which is about 21 kilometres away. See, that in itself is an issue because when you talk about your passage to Portsea, 21 k's away, what's the condition of that road? Is it passable? Are there going to be emergency vehicles on it? That's a really important consideration. And when we consider the next two nearby places of last resort, one in Sorrento at the David McFarlane Reserve, over 23 kilometres away, and also the Janjuk Bob Petit Reserve, again over 23 kilometres away. What's your ability to get there? How safe is it to get to these places? Wouldn't it just make sense not to have this as an option and to leave early, not to be reliant on a last resort? I'll just leave that there with you. I often show this particular slide to give you some idea of the very indiscriminate nature of fire, the harshness, the reality that is fire, the embers, the fast-moving grass fires, the aftermath of a fire, canopy fires, the smoke. All these are important factors that give us some idea of the harshness of fire. You know, this monster we call fire is a danger to us all. The take-homes as we approach the end of this presentation is all about having the resources which are available to download, and I strongly suggest that you download them. And if there's any issues there, and if you want the bushfire planning workshop to give you more advice, or if you want to contact me directly or any of the CFA community safety team, my details will be available through your CFA captain. And that's another consideration, connecting with your local brigade and community. Now, John Monaghan, your brigade captain in Wallington, is more than happy to take calls, discuss the capability of the brigade and your capability and your fire plan. And together we can work collectively and collaboratively to make sure that you are safe during this fire period. A level of information has been provided to you this morning to give you some of the basic fire safety essentials to keep you safe during this time. I'm going to launch our final poll now, and thank you for those of you that are still listening and having active participation. And this final poll is just that. It looks at two questions to give me some feedback for the persons that prepared this presentation as to, well, did this meeting or platform give you a better understanding of bushfire risk in your local area? And of course, would you recommend this to families and friends that are in a bushfire prone area? I'll just give you a couple of minutes while you do that. Oh, that's great. Thank you for the positive feedback there. Lovely. I'm going to end that polling now and share those results with you. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. So it's good to know that the majority have found that this has been a very useful presentation, and some it confirmed what they already knew. Fantastic. Thank you for your honesty and frankness there. And of course, you would recommend this to a lot of people in areas that are susceptible to fire. On behalf of the CFA, I would just like to say that some elements of this presentation, some of you may have found alarming and emotionally disturbing. In this regard, we do actually have 2 support lines that you can access for emotional support and just someone to talk to. We understand that fire can be a very disturbing phenomena for us all, but by staying safe and mitigating that risk, by using our fire safety essentials knowledge, by using our initiative and using our sense of community cohesion, we can all keep safe during this difficult time and testing time of the year. My name is Raj Samurai. I thank you for your presence and feedback this morning. I wish you well and have a safe fire period. Thank you.